Hey guys, it's Sabby Sabs, and I have a very special guest with me today. His name is Jay. He's a progressive, and he is the host of the podcast, The Populist Voice. Welcome, Jay.
Hello, thank you for having me on the show, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Jay. So, can you tell everyone just a little bit about your background and why you decided to become progressive?
Sure. So a little bit about my background. I grew up in Compton, LA. So we were either, moving around either in the city of Compton or LA. And during a time where at the height of gang violence, the height of cocaine trafficking. So we're talking the mid 80s, Reagan time. I grew up during that era. So in LA. So that kind of shaped that experience growing up and all the things that happened to oppress people affected me and shaped, my view on the world. And then my two parents are very influential. I get from my mom her dedication, oh, you're gonna tell me I can't do it, then I'm gonna do it just because you told me. That sort of determination I get from my mom. And from my dad, he was the political one. So politics definitely came from my dad's side. And that sort of put me on a road to where I was gonna become a progressive just off of the thinking I got in my household. So yeah, that's how that's sort of my beginning. And what sort of led me more to start leaning progressive in my adult years was just living through oppression, just living through oppression and seeing with my own eyes oppression and separate topic, but that's a topic that Black community, we don't talk in terms of oppression. We do talk about oppression, but we don't have the understanding that what's happening to us, the reason our schools are underfunded is oppression. Like, um, so those were my influences. And then seeing everything happening in the world, seeing what's happening to oppressed people. Then Bernie Sanders came along and kind of crystallized what I was thinking in 2015, 16, and brings me here today.
Awesome. So you have a podcast called The Populist Voice. So why did you decide to start your own podcast? And can you tell everybody a little bit about your podcast?
Yes, so the Populist Voice, so I didn't go, a year ago, I didn't think I was going to be, hosting a political show. I didn't, that wasn't on my radar. My background is in a creative field, so film production. So, I didn't have my eyes on this at all. Always been a political person. And then just the year that we had in 2020, I just felt like, hey, it's a pandemic. I need a way to participate digitally in the struggle of oppressed people by speaking out the truth. And I wanted to be a voice in the revolution. Um, I felt like I could articulate what other people or what a good amount of people was thinking and feeling and going through. And something my mom always told me was that I was going to be a preacher when I was little. She's like, "You're going to be a preacher." It just, I feel like that's what I'm doing, but I'm preaching a different gospel than you would normally assume. And that's sort of what's my thinking around bringing together the populist voice.
Awesome. Yeah, I really like it. Also leads me to another question. Recently, you had a segment on your podcast titled the next leader of the left movement cannot be a politician. And I've already listened to this and watched it on YouTube, and I thought it was really good. And I think people really need to hear this. So could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea, I forget where it came from. Most likely it came from somewhere on Twitter, where, or just the discourse, the conversation in the leftist community. I know we use progressive too, but I'm going to use leftist community. The discourse on Twitter was getting out of hand. So I saw a tweet where somebody was describing a person that they admire, and it was a politician, and it just struck me that the way people view politicians was more like a celebrity than a public servant. And that kind of spurred the idea of a politician cannot be the leader of a leftist movement. And that's sort of how I got the idea of like, yeah, this is not a good idea to have. And then I just thought of Bernie Sanders and all the pitfalls he had. And then I came up with 6 reasons why a politician should not be the leader of a leftist movement.
Yeah, I know one of the things that you mentioned, and I've talked about this with my friends, like after Bernie like dropped out of the race, is that once he like dropped out, it was like, okay, who's going to lead this now?
Right, right. Right. That's exactly what happened, and it was just like a vacuum, and everybody just kind of scattered out, to do their own thing in the same struggle. And the movement needs a person or maybe a group of people who's saying the things. Hey, let's all move this way. Let's all move that way, and that's kind of what Bernie was doing. The problem was it was centered around a campaign and an election. And that fact kind of illustrates some of the reasons why politicians should not be a part of a leftist movement. So for example, one of the reasons is a politician is has their allegiance to their party. So what happened with Bernie Sanders, for example? Obama came in, put his arm around him and said, hey, come on, Bernie, be a team guy. Bernie Sanders, at that moment, when he decided to drop out, he decided to say, hey, my allegiance or the priority is the party, yep, not the movement. I mean, because of all times to drop out of a race, it should not be during a pandemic, especially when you're the leader of a movement where you're this close to really reaching the White House or really affecting change, at least. And you don't do that. So
Mm-hmm. I also think too, like when we look at like the civil rights movement, Dr. King wasn't a politician.
Exactly. Exactly. None of the movements, none of the revolutions. Just read history. None of them were ran by politicians, because of the reason I just mentioned, how their allegiance is to their party. Another reason is movement should not be centered around elections. Movement should not be centered around electing a singular person. Electing, progressives and leftists is a strategy, but that is not the main course. That is a spoke in the wheel. That is not the wheel. The movement should be the wheel, and connecting a movement to a politician means we're on their time schedule. So instead of rallying for $15 an hour, we have to go for a rally to put him in office. Like, that's not what the movement should be used for. And then there's another reason that I mentioned, which is being attached. If you're a politician, you are by definition attached to a party. And being attached to a party means you're going to limit your reach to reach other people not a part of the party. So it doesn't matter. Like, you could be a person who believes everything Bernie says. You can believe in Medicare for all. You can believe in, you know, a Green New Deal. You can believe in a living wage. But because he's attached to the Democratic Party, there's a certain segment of people who simply will not go over to that movement, not because of the beliefs or the policies, but because he's attached to the Democratic Party. So that limit is another reason we should not have a politician as the leader of a leftist movement. But again, it doesn't mean we do not help progressive people get elected. It's not the same thing.
Right. Another thing I noticed too is that, like, once Bernie stepped down, especially as we got closer to Biden and Trump like being elected, it was like I felt like the progressive movement has started to split. And I think you've probably seen some of this on Twitter too. Like,
Absolutely.
there was some people on the side of like force the vote, some people on the other side, and it's like this big divide now. Even though I know people say, well, Twitter isn't real, but even like in real life, just talking to people, like there's like this big divide. And it just seems like part of it is because nobody is leading this anymore. Like, people have started going in different directions. I've
Right.
noticed, like, since Biden has been elected, some of the commentators, some of the progressive commentators, they're not even talking about this anymore.
I mean, you preaching to the choir, because I've said this over and over online. I don't know what's happening to our progressive media. It was like the last few months of the campaigning, they decided to swallow their tongue about Joe Biden when they were talking about and critiquing him on a daily basis during when Bernie Sanders was in the race. And then afterwards, just get him in office and then, we'll do the work. And it's like nothing has changed. It's like, when are you going to start, getting back in the arena and critiquing this guy? And it just hasn't happened. And it's sad to see. But I think it illustrates a larger point, is that we're seeing a changing of the guard. We're seeing a changing of going from the old progressive to the new leftists. What was progressive during the Obama years is not the progressive today. And also what's becoming considered leftist or progressive, they're interchangeable to me, but leftist is what's becoming more and more part of the ingredients that makes you a leftist is strategy. That's becoming more and more part of what makes you a leftist. It's like this. It's like we're in wartime, pandemic, depression. We can't be doing the same things to affect change. We can't say we're just going to elect progressives. You know how long it's going to take to elect progressives to make any sort of real change? We're talking decades. People don't have that time. Like, it's a pandemic, and there's no sense of urgency with the old progressive. I think that's it. The sense of urgency is too low. I'm not going to say it's no sense of urgency. I can't make that determination, but it's like the old urgency is here. The new urgency is here. And this is where that chasm is beginning to show. And one last point about that is Bernie Sanders needs to be given more credit for what he did, because either we're seeing the splitting of the left, or either we're seeing these are people that Bernie Sanders brought together that was never together. Mm-hmm. We were never together. And Bernie Sanders brought us together. And now that he's gone, it's like, now the differences are bigger, and it's a lot of more finger pointing. So it could be a mixture of both. It could be old guard, new guard. It could be the whole thing that we've never been a cohesive group. It's just that Bernie made it seem that way.
Yeah. So one of the things I noticed, like, I went to Bernie's rally here in Boston, and it was like over 10,000 people. It was huge, huge. Thank goodness it was outdoors. But we got there really early because we figured it would be crowded, but not that many people. And one of the things I noticed, and this is coming up a lot, like in the progressive movement too, is that number one, I was one of few African Americans there, which I thought was ridiculous considering it was over 10,000 people. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, when I do talk to like friends and colleagues of mine, the thing that continues to come up is that why are we not talking about Black issues like in the progressive movement? And I've vented about this numerous times. I feel like more commentators could talk about this. And that's actually part of the reason why I decided to do this, to interview people, is to introduce people that other people may not know of that are working on these issues and are passionate about these issues, or they know of them, but they didn't know that they're working on this stuff. So I recently interviewed Marianne Williamson about reparations. So that was a hot topic, like during when Bernie was running and during the primaries. And I noticed, like, even some of the commentators, they were just like, well, you know, I don't really agree with reparations. And I'm like, no, this is exactly why we have such a hard time getting more African Americans to be a part of the progressive movement.
I, well, this is what I say to this. I've had this discussion also, is that what Black leftists know or are realizing is that our white brothers and sisters or our non-Black brothers and sisters in the movement, they're a lot better than the people who are not in the movement, but they still have some ways to go. They still have some ways to go. We have to step back and take and understand that conditioning doesn't stop with melanin. Like, white people are also conditioned too. And as much as they want to try to break out of that, consciously try to break any sort of racial conditioning, there's still a gap in understanding about that. Because to me, reparations is a no-brainer. Like, this is a no-brainer. It's reparation. You built the country, we built the country, pay us the money. Oh, we wasn't the ones, you didn't pay our ancestors. If they paid our ancestors, that money would have been given down generation to generation to us. So the country owes us the reparations, not individual white people, not the president, not the Congress. The country owes Black people reparations.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree.
I
I
wanted to
think,
add
mhm.
that that was one thing about Bernie Sanders. I thought he dropped the ball in his campaign, is that um, reparations have, like, Bernie's, what the progressive movement has got to understand, this is a very important point, is that there's a certain segment of Black people, if you're not talking in Black language, you're not going to get them. So yeah, Medicare for all does affect Black people a lot. I mean, that's a racial issue, yes. But there's a certain segment of people, unless you're saying the words Black people, unless you're saying Black issues, they can agree with all the other stuff that you're saying, because they need to understand Black people have been told this stuff for hundreds of years. So you can't just, you know what I mean? You can't just tell us. Like, we want to see the action. So that was something I thought Bernie Sanders dropped. He didn't have a reparations plan. He didn't speak in Black talk, Black speech, I should say, not Black talk, but Black speech. And I think that was the reason why he didn't do very well in the South. Like, my family's from the South, dad's from West Virginia, mom's from Louisiana, and you have to talk in terms of Black issues, or you're just not going to get the majority of Black people. And this is something that the Democrats sort of understand, but they do it in a way of virtue signaling. It's the naming a street Martin Luther King instead of funding the schools. You get what I'm saying? It's like, that'll get you, oh, the Democrats, they got our school named Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary. And that's where I went in Compton, Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary. But the school is severely underfunded. How about you take the name of the school back and fund the school? You get what I'm saying? So Democrats, they're feeling that chasm. I'm getting off the topic, but they're feeling that chasm, but by way of virtue signaling. If that makes sense. I hope I'm not going off topic. Sorry.
Yeah, no, very much. I think that, I know for me throughout this election, I've really tried to basically convince people, like Black people, that no, like Bernie is the way to go here. Like he has the platform that's actually going to benefit African Americans. But they weren't really seeing that. You know,
Right.
media was a big part of that. But another thing that was brought up to me was representation. They don't see a lot of Black people like in the progressive movement,
Mhm.
and like I have to agree with that a little bit, because I do feel like we could have way more come over to this side. And I was wondering, like, what do you think like we could do to increase that?
It's what I said about Bernie Sanders, but just on a larger scale. And some progressives are starting to include reparations in their demands for things. But in order to get more Black people, more Black folks, particularly probably not young Black, but the middle, the 30 to 45, you have to speak in terms of Black speech. You have to talk about reparations. You have to talk about policing. So 2020 kind of brought policing to the forefront, which has been a big Black issue, which is why you're seeing a little bit more Black progressives come on board. It's because of, I believe it's because of that particular issue. So hopefully the progressive movement is learning that we need, if you want Black leftists, because they're there, they have the beliefs in the policies, but they're just not coming along because you're not talking to them. You need to talk to the It's like these people that's been marginalized, you can't use generic language. You have to use specific language to those people that has been marginalized. Otherwise, you're continuing, is it marginalization? Is that a word? You're continuing them being marginalized. You have to use the language. When we're talking about disabilities, you have to use that language. You're talking about trans people, you have to use that. You have to use the language. You can't just talk in general terms at everybody. You can't do that. You have to target your information similar to what he did with the Latino community. Look what he
Right.
did. I mean, he went to their communities. He's talking to them. He's having taco stands. He's talking to them in Spanish. Like that's what you have to do, but for on the Black folks level, on the Black folks tier, that's what needs to happen for the progressive movement.
Agreed. All right, Jay. So I have one more question for you.
Sure.
So I saw today you're thinking about starting another podcast.
Yes, I'm so like when I was talking about the Populist Voice being my show, the original idea was for it to be a network, and it's different podcasts on the same channel. And now I'm just rolling that out. So look for the Populist Voice. I'm adding 4 new shows that are hosted by other people. And then I'm adding 1 new show that will be hosted by me, which is Free Black America podcast. And that's just going to focus on what kind of we're talking about, bringing to light Black leftists, showing people, putting Black faces to the leftist movement is what basically I want to do, giving a Black perspective, because even in the leftist movement, there are differences between what Black people, Black leftists believe versus other leftists. Just shining a light on that, and that's what that podcast is going to be doing. And I'm excited. I have on my second episode, I have this community activist guy who has come up with 10 demands. You may have heard it, 10 demands for justice.
Mm-hmm.
Just talking about police reform, and so I'm excited about that particular guest for my personal reasons with police shootings in my personal life. So that is very important to me, and I'm excited about that new podcast.
Awesome. All right, everyone. I'll be sure to put the link to Jay's podcast in the description below. Jay, thank you so much for coming out today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye.